The wind pressed flat against the broken fence line, humming low like a hymn sung through teeth. Snow didn't fall. It blew sideways, sharp and without mercy, dragging grit and sorrow through the hollow bones of Dry Valley. There, tied with her own rope to a split rail just outside the old feed barn, stood a woman in a faded gingham dress and boots too worn for the weather. Her wrists, lashed to the post with crude knots, bore red marks where she'd struggled earlier, but no more. Now she stood still, chin level, shoulders squared, dignity fastened tighter than the rope. Her name was Temperance Wade, 26, widow, cast off. Her dark hair was plastered to her cheeks by wet flakes, and her eyes, a startling gray-green, stared out at nothing with the weight of knowing too much and being believed too little. A bell rang once down the road, midday. Most folks passed her by without turning their heads. A few did glance, long enough to feed their tongues with something sour for supper. One child reached for her hand, but the mother yanked him back like Temperance carried disease. Maybe she did, in their minds. Shame spreads quicker than fever. She had been let go by Pastor Quaid that morning, shoved out of his parlor with a loaf of bread she refused to take. His last words hissed behind his teeth, "You bring judgment on every house you enter." So now she stood in front of that barn, staked like a warning. But she wouldn't cry, not for them. The only soul who did stop was Melba Fay, the laundress with a mole like a second eye and a mouth full of truth nobody asked for. She crossed the muddy street with a shawl and eyes half soft. "I can't untie you, girl," Melba whispered, wrapping the shawl gently around Temperance's shoulders. "But I can see you." Temperance gave no reply, only nodded once, an acknowledgment of grace in a place bone dry of it. By dusk, the cold had turned spiteful. Her dress clung like wet paper. She breathed slow, conserving heat, heartbeats, and pride. That was when she heard it, hooves crunching snow, slow and deliberate, like the rider wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere. A wagon came around the bend, drawn by a single black mare and driven by a man hunched in a coat the color of dried blood. No hat. Just thick, coal-dark hair whipped by wind. The wagon bed was stacked with hay, cut square, clean, and tied with care. The man's face was rough-hewn, jaw like stone, eyes hidden in shadow. He slowed his team without being asked. Temperance watched him like a coyote might watch fire, curious, wary, too proud to plead. He said nothing. Didn't even step down. Just looked at her, long and quiet. After a moment, the mare pawed the snow. The man blinked, clicked his tongue, and moved on. Temperance's breath caught, not in grief but understanding. Men like that didn't interfere. Not in a town where intervention got you named alongside the sin. But he came back. Long after lanterns had lit windows and supper smoke curled from chimneys, he returned. No wagon this time. Just the man on foot, boots crunching softly as he approached. She hadn't moved. He stopped a few feet away, holding her gaze. Snow hissed past them in sheets, but neither flinched. Finally his voice came, low, worn, like it hadn't been used in a season. "They said you did something wrong." Temperance's lips curled dry. "That's so. What was it?" She shrugged as best she could with bound arms. I breathed. A long silence. He stepped forward and reached for the rope. She tensed, every nerve waiting for the twist. Mockery, insult, maybe a joke about what she could offer in return. But his hands were careful. He didn't look away, didn't leer or tremble. Just untied her with quiet reverence, like undoing something holy. The rope dropped. And she said, voice steady as flint, "If you undo this rope, you gotta marry me." He paused. His hands fell to his sides. No laughter. No scoff. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back to the wagon. She didn't follow. Not until he returned with a blanket, wrapped it around her shoulders, and gestured to the empty bench beside him. That's when she climbed aboard. They rode through the snow in silence. The town fell behind, the wind softened, and the stars blinked down like they hadn't seen such a thing in decades. She didn't ask his name. He didn't offer it. She only said, "Thank you." And he replied, "You said I had to marry you." The words were neither joke nor oath, just fact. A slow smile ghosted her mouth, one no one had seen in years. His cabin sat near the edge of a pine ridge, where the world felt wider and the sky leaned in closer. He helped her down without touching her skin. The wind had eased there. The air smelled like cedar and old earth. As they stepped inside, she caught sight of the fire, a small one but tended. She noticed the space, neat but lonely. A table with 2 chairs. A faded photograph on the wall of a woman and child. Boots by the door, lined and unworn. A pie plate dusty with memory. He lit a lamp. She took off her boots. That night, she slept on a cot he'd unrolled near the fire. He didn't take the bed, just stoked the flames and leaned against the door, coat still on, hatless, watchful. The rope she'd been bound with now lay in a coil by the hearth. In the dark, she whispered, "Why'd you come back?" It took him a long while to answer. "Didn't feel right leaving you there." She nodded into the blanket. "Ain't been right in a while." The wind outside sighed through the trees like a mother too tired to weep. The next morning brought a soft hush of sun through frost-crusted windows. She awoke with the blanket pulled tighter around her. He was already outside, chopping wood in rhythm, each swing a vow that didn't need speaking. She watched him for a while through the window, then rose, took his second mug from the shelf, filled it with hot water and laid it on the table. By the time he stepped inside, face red with cold, she said, "Name's Temperance." He nodded once. "Ira." She handed him the mug and he took it. They drank in silence, letting it fill the space words would have broken. Later that day they rode into town, not to speak, not to plead, but to fetch feed and flour. When they passed the chapel, the bell rang out again. No one tied her this time. But all eyes followed her like smoke. Inside the general store, Mrs. Melba Fay didn't speak, only slipped a spool of thread into Temperance's pocket when she thought no one was looking. Eldon Pike stood near the barrels of grain, arms folded, smirk sharp. "Thought she'd be halfway to Laramie by now," he drawled. Ira didn't look at him. Just dropped a silver coin on the counter and held Temperance's gaze. "You ready?" he asked her. She nodded. "Always have been." They stepped out into the snow again, into the gaze of townsfolk who measured worth by whispers. But this time they didn't walk apart. Their shoulders brushed. Temperance glanced once behind her, at the chapel, the barn, the spot where the rope once held her like an accusation. It still lay coiled in Ira's wagon. She never asked him why he kept it, and he never said. But she'd see him sometimes, sitting on the porch with it beside him, eyes far away, as if measuring all the things a man could undo. That rope, like her shame, had been tight once. Now it was slack. And the knot was gone. The cabin didn't creak when they stepped inside. It sighed. Like a place long untouched had drawn a breath to receive them. Cold clung to the floorboards, where shadows slept beneath the table and the hearth held nothing but charred ghosts from fires long dead. Temperance paused on the threshold, eyes sweeping across the space, every inch of her soaking in what hadn't been said. It was clean. Painfully clean. No clutter, no smell of living. The bed in the far corner was tightly made, edges tucked as though waiting for someone who'd promised to return. A photograph sat on the mantel, blurred with time, but she saw a woman holding a baby, neither smiling. The kind of portrait you sat for because you had to. Ira Colt set the rope down by the door. Not coiled neat, just dropped. He shed his coat, hung it without rush, and moved toward the stove. The silence between them didn't feel heavy. It felt intentional, like both knew the weight of words too well to throw them around carelessly. She stepped in and felt the warmth of the cabin begin to press into her bones. Dampness clung to her dress, but she ignored it. Her boots left prints across the pine floor. She didn't apologize. "I'll cook," she said, voice low, hoarse from windburn. "You know where things are?" he asked without looking up from the stove. "I reckon I will." In the pantry she found flour, salt, a slab of bacon wrapped in muslin, and a half-empty jar of dried beans. Enough to start something. The pot was blackened from use but clean. She ran her fingers along its rim. Someone once cooked here with care. She didn't ask who. By the time the first scent of bacon filled the room, Ira had lit the fire and placed 2 plates on the table. He moved without noise, every action deliberate. His sleeves rolled to the elbow revealed forearms dark with sun and scar. A man who worked alone. Temperance stirred quietly. She'd cooked for men before, Some who beat her, some who only looked at her like she was a warm place to rest. This was different. She didn't feel watched. She felt seen. He ate slow, chewing each bite like it had to last. She sat across from him, hands folded in her lap until he nudged the second plate toward her. She picked at it, flavorless bread, greasy bacon, but it filled her. When she finished, he poured water into 2 cups. Still no blessing. No conversation. Just the sound of wind against the window panes and 2 people pretending they weren't already measuring one another by what hadn't been spoken. "I'll clean the dishes," she said. He nodded, rose, and opened the door to toss out scraps. She saw the way he paused, just briefly, to look at the dark woods like something out there might call his name. Later, as the fire cracked in the hearth and she laid blankets on the floor near it, he pulled a cot from a side room. He didn't offer her the bed. "I'll sleep here," she said simply. "You sure?" "I am." And that was that. The night deepened. Ira took the chair by the fire, boots off, eyes closed but not sleeping. She could feel him thinking. The kind of silence that's loud in the chest. She stared at the flames. "You got folks?" His eyes opened. "Had a brother. He left. Had a girl once. She died." Temperance nodded like that explained everything. Maybe it did. "Was she your wife?" "No. We were fixin' to be." She wrapped the blanket tighter. "Heard folks say I was married to a criminal. Like it made me one too." "I don't care what they say." "You should," she murmured. "It gets loud." "I don't scare easy." She didn't answer. Just pulled the blanket over her chin and listened to the wind dragging itself down the chimney like an old man telling stories. In the morning she woke to the scent of coffee and bacon again, less burned this time. Her body ached, hips bruised from the floor, but she stretched like someone remembering what it meant to be human. Ira was at the table, reading a faded Bible with one hand, the other holding a steaming cup. He glanced up. Coffee's hot. Food's warm. World still spinning. She smiled faintly. "That's so." He motioned to the plate he'd set out for her. She took it without thanks. He didn't seem the kind to need it. Later she wandered the cabin. Touched the window ledges, found dust in corners but never on the tools. Everything had a place. She opened the small back door and saw the barn. Half collapsed but standing. Chickens pecked aimlessly in frozen dirt. One cow, long-boned and slow-eyed, chewed hay like it didn't care who owned it. Temperance rolled up her sleeves. By midday the coop had been swept, the cow brushed, the water trough cleared of ice. She cut herself once on a rusty hinge, wrapped it tight with her apron and kept going. Ira watched from the porch, smoking a rolled cigarette like it was the only indulgence he allowed. "Wasn't expectin' you to work," he said as she passed. "I wasn't expectin' to sleep warm last night," she replied. They left it there. In the evenings she sewed. His shirts had holes, she didn't ask how, but her hands moved with memory. Stitch, fold, knot. At first he seemed almost embarrassed, then grateful. One night she asked, "Why didn't you leave me tied?" His answer was simple. "Didn't feel right. Didn't ask what I'd done. Didn't need to." She looked at him hard. "What if I deserved it?" He met her gaze. "You didn't." She didn't push. The snow melted slower out at the ridge. Days were longer now, but nights still cut deep. Temperance began tending a small patch of dirt near the porch. She wanted flowers even if they didn't take. Wanted color in a place made of gray and silence. He'd leave early in the mornings, cutting wood, checking traps, tending to fences. She never asked where he went. He never asked why she stayed. One afternoon, while hauling buckets, she tripped on a stone and fell hard onto the porch steps. Ira heard it from inside, rushed out, eyes wide. She tried to stand but hissed in pain. He helped her gently, hands firm but respectful. "You all right?" "Busted my pride. Maybe a rib." He lifted her slowly, carried her inside, set her down like she weighed nothing. She let him. For the first time she let herself lean into him. He didn't let go right away. That night, as she lay back on her cot, ribs throbbing, she whispered, "You ever been tied to a post, Ira?" His voice came from the darkness, thick with something unspoken. "No, I have." "It makes you feel smaller than your name." Pause. That why you gave me yours? Temperance didn't answer at first. Then, softly, it was the only way I could ask to be saved without begging. He breathed slow. I'd have untied you even if you didn't say that. But would I have followed you? Silence settled again, warm this time. The kind that cradled. The next day she wore a clean dress. One she found in a chest in the back room, lace at the collar, pearl buttons a little too long. His mother's, maybe. She didn't ask. When Ira saw her, he stopped chopping wood mid-swing. Just stood there, axe hanging loose in his hand. You look different, he said. I feel different, she replied. You think folks'll leave us be? No, she said with a soft smile. But I don't much care. That night he brought in a bouquet of wild lavender. Laid it on the table, rough hands hiding the gesture behind a grunt. She said nothing, only placed the sprigs in a chip jar and set it near the window. They didn't speak of it. Later, as they sat by the fire, her mending socks, him carving a sliver of wood into something shapeless, he asked, You ever think of leavin'? Startin' fresh somewhere? Fresh only means something, if you bring yourself along, she said. I've been new before. Still bled the same. He nodded. You bleed less here? She looked around the room. The cracked window, the patched shirts, the lavender leaning toward moonlight. I think I'm healin'. Ira didn't say anything more that night. But when he rose from the chair and walked to the bedroom, he paused, hand on the doorframe. If you ever want the bed, he said, it's yours? She didn't respond. But the next morning, the cot was folded up. And the rope by the door was gone. The thaw came slow to the ridge. Snow melted in patches, revealing bare earth like bruises under old skin. The trees wept their icicles, branches slick with memory, and the creek behind Ira's barn began to gurgle again, soft, unsure, as though relearning its song. Life was creeping back into the land, but it came with whispers, not fanfare. Temperance stood at the fence line with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, nails rimmed in soil, planting early potatoes in the softening ground. Her breath still smoked in the morning air, but the sun held longer now, warming her shoulders and lifting the scent of damp cedar. The dress she wore had been mended twice, one patch square and neat along the hip. She liked it that way, useful, plain, her own. Ira worked nearby, sharpening the plow blade with methodical grace. He had the kind of patience you couldn't teach, the kind born of too much silence and too many long winters. He didn't speak unless the words felt needed. And when he looked at her now, there was a steadiness in his gaze she hadn't seen in any man since before her husband's ropes snapped taut at the gallows. Frost might come again tonight, he said, glancing at the horizon. Temperance nodded, wiping dirt on her apron. Then I'll lay canvas down. Simple shared. That was their rhythm now. Later that afternoon, a wagon rolled slow down the trail toward the ridge, its wheels loud on rock, its shadow cutting across the meadow. Ira stood up, hand hovering over the axe handle, not out of fear but memory. Temperance paused in her sweeping, broom braced at her side. The visitors weren't strangers. Mrs. Melba Fay sat in the seat beside a thinner, younger woman with red knuckles and a child in her lap. They didn't dismount. Just looked. Well, Melba said, voice half tart, half tired. Figured I ought to see if you'd starved or gone feral. Temperance leaned on her broom. Not yet. Got beans and hard bread. Wild, I know. The child, freckled, gap-toothed, giggled. Melba nodded to the porch. Brought a tin of lard. Some sewing needles. Not charity, just extras. Ira walked forward and took the basket. Much obliged. Town's talkin', Melba said then. More now than before. Temperance didn't flinch. When have they not? Pastor says you're living in sin. Said the Lord don't abide unwed shelter. Eldon Pike, he's stirrin' up worse. Ira's jaw set. Eldon's a drunk and a coward. Melba gave a small, almost admiring snort. Still he's loud. And loud fills space truth can't reach. Temperance stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. Melba, you here to warn me or just enjoy the view? I'm here, Melba said, her voice softening. 'Cause I remember a girl with dirt on her chin who once gave half her bread to a crying widow. Temperance looked down. The child in the wagon waved. She waved back, lips pressed firm. When the wagon rolled away, the wind returned, soft through the pines, and something shifted inside her, like pride standing up a little taller in her chest. They kept working. That evening, Ira sat beside the hearth while she mended the cuff of his shirt. The fire cast shadows across his face, catching in the creases by his eyes, turning him older and softer at once. "You think we should marry for real?" she asked, not looking up. He didn't answer right away. "I already live like you're my wife," he said finally. "But the town don't see it that way. They don't feed us. Don't warm this house. Don't know you like I do." She nodded. "Still their noise follows me. Like smoke on old clothes." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You want the paper? The ring? I want to stop feeling like I'm being measured every time I walk down a street. Then we'll go to the preacher." Her head snapped up. "You do that? I undid your rope, didn't I?" That night, she found herself holding the lavender jar by the window, staring out into darkness. She whispered a name, her husband's, and set it down. They rode to town 3 days later. The wind had stilled. Dust followed their wagon like a thin memory. Ira wore his best shirt, the one she had stitched. She braided her hair and pinned it up, not for vanity but armor. They entered the church near dusk. The pews were empty. The light stained the windows gold and blood red. Pastor Ephraim Quaid stood at the altar with his collar half unbuttoned and eyes like weathered paper. He saw them and stiffened. "We came to marry," Ira said. Quaid's mouth worked a moment before words came. She's a woman of ill rumor. You know what folks say." "I know," Ira said. "And I don't care." Quaid looked at Temperance like she was a splinter in the wood of his chapel. "I cast her out because I believed what I was told." "And you were wrong," she said quietly. "But I'm not here for your apology. Just your service." He hesitated. "This town won't look kindly on me performing the rite." Temperance stepped forward. "They never looked kindly on me anyhow." Quaid's hand twitched, then fell. He walked down from the pulpit, voice dry. "Fine. Bring 2 witnesses. We'll make it official." They left without looking back. At the mercantile, they found 2 old widows playing cards on the porch. When asked to witness, both nodded like they'd been waiting for it. "About time," one said. "The way you 2 look at each other could boil beans." Back at the ridge, preparations were quiet. Temperance cleaned the cabin like a prayer. Ira shaved. They didn't talk much about it, just worked side by side, pausing now and then to touch hands in passing, the way sunlight touches windowsills. On the morning of the wedding, Temperance wore the dress she'd stitched from scraps and memories. White linen with blue thread along the cuffs. Ira met her eyes as she stepped onto the porch, and the way he looked at her, it wasn't awe, but something steadier. Respect. They stood beneath the old pine tree, where wind whispered through needles and no bells rang. Pastor Quaid recited scripture in a clipped voice. The widows smiled like they'd seen this story before. Ira took her hand, rough palm to palm. "Do you," Quaid asked, "take this woman?" "I do," Ira said before the words were finished. Temperance's voice trembled only once. "I do." No kiss followed. Just their hands, still joined, and the rustle of pine needles falling like confetti. After, they shared bread and broth with the widows. Quaid left without a word. When the women were gone, Ira and Temperance sat on the porch steps, bare feet touching. "Feels different now," she whispered. "Does it?" "A little heavier. A little lighter." He touched her wrist, thumb brushing the spot where the rope had once bitten deep. "Then maybe it's real." They watched the stars rise, scattered like salt across black velvet. The world was still. Still judged. Still whispered. But their house stood, warm and full of breath. A week later, Ira rode to town alone for supplies. Temperance stayed back, planting early corn. That evening, she saw a figure on horseback watching from the tree line. Not Ira. She stood tall, hand on her hip. The rider didn't move. Just stared. It wasn't until morning that she found the rope, coiled neatly at her doorstep. Cling. Fresh. And tied into a noose. The rain came sudden, uninvited, ripping across the valley like glass shattering against sky. The wind flung branches like warnings. Trees groaned. Soil turned to mush beneath the hooves of the two horses climbing the trail toward Ira Colt's cabin. They moved without lanterns, their riders slick with mud and silence, faces damp beneath their hats. They didn't knock when they arrived. Inside, Temperance lit the lantern against the storm's tantrum and glanced once toward the door. She could feel it in her blood. Some animals go quiet when danger nears, and tonight she was mute as stone. Ira entered a moment later, soaked from latching the barn doors. His shirt clung to him like second skin. She offered him a towel. He didn't take it, just looked at her, slow and sure. "Someone's coming," he said. "I know," she replied. "Storm's just their excuse." They waited. When the knock finally came, it was the kind that wasn't asking permission. Ira opened the door, not halfway, not wide, but just enough to show the man outside that he wasn't afraid. Eldon Pike leaned in, shadow-drenched, with rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Another man stood behind him, Luther Kane, town stable hand, thick in the arms and thin in the soul. "Well," Eldon drawled, lips twisted cruel, "I see the good Lord's been busy, turning harlots into housewives and sinners into saints." Ira didn't blink. "You lost." Eldon's eyes darted past him, toward the hearth glow and the shadow of Temperance's figure. "I come to give fair warning. The town's had about enough of her charity act." "You mean her livin'?" Ira said, voice flat as snow. "She's a staying colt. A woman like that don't get to just vanish into good grace. Pastor Mavie married you, but folks remember who she is. What she is." Temperance stepped into view then. Her presence halted everything. The fire behind her framed her silhouette, bare feet, braided hair, a face calm as candlelight. "I remember what you are too, Eldon," she said softly. "You've got a daughter with my eyes and your wife's silence." Eldon flinched like slapped. Luther cleared his throat. "We ain't here for a fight, just to say if she stays, trouble follows." "She stays," Ira said. "And if the trouble comes? Then let it." They left in the downpour, but not without tossing one last word over their shoulders. "You'll regret it." Ira shut the door and bolted it, but the echo stayed, thick as smoke. That night, the storm clawed the roof, thunder cracking like rifle fire. Temperance couldn't sleep. She sat near the fire, blanket over her shoulders, watching the rope. The noose still sat coiled on the mantel. She hadn't touched it since the morning it appeared. Ira rose from bed and sat beside her without a word. His body heat found hers in silence. "Why won't they let me go?" she whispered. "Because they never learned how to forgive." Her breath hitched. "You think I'm cursed?" He shook his head slowly. "I think you're proof they were wrong. And folks don't like being wrong." She looked at him, eyes bright. "If they come back, I'll be between you and whatever comes," he said. Outside, the wind moaned like something wounded. In the days that followed, the town grew colder, not in weather but in manner. The general store stopped ordering what they needed. Mail stopped coming. The preacher turned his sermons sharp and veiled, naming sins and parables everyone understood. Children were pulled away by mothers who looked too long. Even Melba Faye stopped coming by. Temperance stitched a red scarf and wore it when they rode in for supplies. She walked taller than usual despite the turned backs. She didn't speak. Let her presence accuse them better than any word could. One day a boy, no older than 8, broke from his mother's grip and handed her a handful of wildflowers before being yanked away. The petals dropped onto the dust as he was dragged off. Ira bent, picked them up, and placed them gently in the crook of her arm. They didn't speak of it. Tension thickened like stew gone to rot. Ira began sleeping with the rifle closer. The barn door stayed barred. Even the chickens seemed restless. Then came the fire. It started just after sundown, with smoke curling from the hay loft, thick and orange. Temperance screamed first, and Ira was already moving. Flames licked the rafters like they'd been waiting all along. The cow inside bellowed, panicked. Ira rushed in with a wet cloth over his face. Temperance followed without hesitation. She found the bucket, filled it from the barrel, and hurled water at the base while Ira got the cow out. Sparks flew, catching her sleeve. She smothered it with her apron, coughing, crying, face streaked with soot. Together they dragged the smoldering hay bales out and kicked dirt across the flames. By the time the rain came, too late, too small, they were both on the ground, coughing, clothes blackened. Ira turned to her, breath ragged. "You all right?" She nodded, tears cutting clean lines down her cheeks. "Burned, not broken." Later, while they huddled in the kitchen, her arm bandaged and the scent of smoke clinging to everything, Ira examined the remains. "Someone poured lamp oil," he said. "It weren't an accident." Temperance nodded. "They want to finish what the rope started." He walked to the mantel, took the noose in his hand, and threw it into the fire. It hissed, curled, turned to ash. That night she didn't sleep on the bed or the cot. She lay beside him, skin to skin, no words between them. Only breath and the memory of almost losing it all. The next morning she found a piece of paper nailed to their fence. No name. Just 5 words in scrawled ink. "Devil's wife. Leave or burn." She held it with trembling hands. Ira read it, then took it from her and burned that too. "Ira," she said, voice shaking, "if you hadn't come back for me." "I did," he said. "But if you hadn't." He looked her in the eyes. "You'd have saved yourself." She wanted to believe him. By week's end, they had rebuilt the barn wall and mended the roof. But the damage inside, the cracked sense of safety, the stolen stillness, took longer to fix. One evening, as she gathered eggs, a figure appeared at the tree line again. Not riding this time, just standing watching. She froze. Her hand closed around the handle of the basket, knuckles white. Ira stepped out, rifle across his shoulder. "You lost again?" he called. The figure didn't answer. Just disappeared into the trees. That night Ira taught her to shoot. Not with impatience or pride, but with gentleness. He showed her how to breathe, how to steady her arms. "You don't have to use it," he said, "but if you need to, you will." She nodded. Her hands didn't shake. Later, sitting on the porch, she whispered, "I thought marrying you might make it stop." "The judgment." She nodded. He looked at her long and sure. "Storms don't ask permission, Temperance. They come when they please. All we do is stand through 'em." She leaned into him. "I want to stay." "You already did." She closed her eyes. Somewhere in the woods, a twig snapped. And this time Ira stood up, reached for the rifle. Because when the storm won't end, sometimes you walk into it. The knock didn't come this time. No words thrown like stones. Just the flicker of fire out the window, orange and hungry, licking up the night sky. Temperance smelled it before she saw it, sharp, oily smoke that didn't belong to hearth or lamp. She threw the door open and saw it blazing. The barn. Again. But this time the flames weren't young. They were deliberate. Fueled. They climbed higher and faster than before, roaring like a thing with breath. The chicken screamed, penned too close. The cow bellowed again, her eyes wild behind the fencing. Ira was already moving, boots slamming the porch, rifle slung on his back. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Temperance grabbed the water buckets and ran, hair unbraided and whipping behind her like a flag of war. Her feet sliced into frozen mud. She didn't feel it. And out of the shadows stepped Eldon Pike. He wasn't hiding now. He wasn't watching. He was there, gun drawn, jaw twisted, soaked in heat and rain and something meaner than either. "I warned you," he shouted. "Told you what had come of harboring whores and calling them wives." Ira spun, rifle raised, steady. "You lit that fire?" His voice rang out, low and lethal. Eldon didn't blink. No man in this county with a spine would have let her stay. Temperance stood frozen, eyes locked on Eldon's shaking hand. The pistol he held looked too heavy for his wrist, but rage steadied it. Ira didn't move. He kept the rifle leveled, not at Eldon's chest, but just below the shoulder. He wasn't aiming to kill. "You got one chance," Ira said. "Drop it." Eldon didn't. "You were a boy once," Temperance said suddenly, voice like steel through smoke. "I held you on my hip while your mother wept in church. You want your daughter to see your name carved into a casket next week." His eyes flickered. "Your fire's dying, Eldon," she added. "And it ain't the barn that's burning. It's your own soul." He hesitated. The gun wavered. That was all Ira needed. One crack split the night. Eldon's pistol flew from his grip, landing in the mud with a pathetic splash. He clutched his hand, yelling, stumbling back. The cow shrieked louder than he did. Ira didn't reload. "You come here again," he said. "I won't aim low." Eldon stared at them, stunned, then ran. No pride, no final threat, just footsteps swallowed by dark. Temperance dropped the buckets. Ira ran with her to the barn. They freed the cow, beat the flames back from the coop, kicked in the last smoking beams. Rain helped. Wind shifted. By the time dawn stretched its gray arms across the sky, the fire had lost its hunger. They stood side by side in the wet ash, breathing hard. Her dress was torn, soot on her cheek. His sleeve was burned at the elbow. Neither cared. She turned to him, chest rising and falling. "We're gonna keep fightin', aren't we?" "We are." "You still glad you undid that rope?" He looked at her, truly looked, and she saw it then. Every word he never spoke lived behind his eyes. "I didn't undo it," he said. "You did. I just happened to be there when you were ready." The sun broke the horizon then, light brushing ash and skin and something tender between them. They buried the remains of the barn that afternoon. Ira worked the shovel. Temperance stacked what could be salvaged. The rope that had once sat by the door, long turned to ash, was never spoken of again. But its ghost lingered, in how he touched her shoulder without flinching, in how she watched his hands not with fear but trust. That night she brought out the Bible they'd been given by the preacher. Not for prayer, but for something else. Inside the front cover there was a place for names. She sat at the table, dipped the pen and wrote carefully. Temperance weighed cold. She set the pen down and looked at him across the table. "You want to add yours?" He nodded once, took the pen, and beneath her name he wrote, Ira James Colt. Then, without ceremony, without witnesses or the noise of bells, they stood, hands joined over the open book. "This is the vow that matters," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "The one that came after fire. After fear." "No paper makes it more true," he replied. But he kissed her then, slow, deep, not desperate. A kiss full of knowing. Of storms weathered and vows earned. Later they sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, the scorched smell still lingering in the air. Crickets returned. The wind softened. Stars blinked overhead. He spoke first. "Do you want to leave?" She didn't answer for a long time. Then, "No. I want to grow roots right here. In the same ground they tried to burn us out of." He smiled just barely. "Then we build again." And as they sat there, a figure approached down the ridge. No horse. No threat. It was the young boy who'd once given her flowers, this time with his father beside him, holding a crate of nails and a hammer. Behind them, another wagon rolled in, Melba Fay in the driver's seat with sacks of flour and two hens clucking in a cage. Temperance gripped Ira's hand. The world had shifted. And somewhere in the soil, where ashes still smoked faintly, something new was already beginning to grow.